Welcome to our webinar series, How to Make Software Migration a Success. I'm your presenter, Brian Kinney, and let's start by reviewing what will be covered throughout the course of our 5-part series. The goal of this series will be to provide you with some tips on how you can make the most out of a software implementation and some benefits provided to your company by exercising those tips. Before we begin, I do think it's important to briefly recap our previous webinars in this series, which were deciding what to adopt and migrating your data. During this part 3, we'll be expanding on some of the themes from those webinars, and if you haven't viewed them, I recommend tuning to each of those videos to learn more about tips on knowing what to adopt and data migration. So let's get started on part 3 of our series, which is training your staff. And in this webinar, we'll learn how to train your staff to empower users for a successful adoption. Training is never going to be a one-size-fits-all part of implementation, but the nice part about training is that there are a lot of options available for you to use. One method on getting training time with your vendor is to schedule one remote training session with all relevant parties included. During these types of training sessions, parties can bounce ideas off one another, and this can provide a fuller picture of interconnected and individual workflows alike. Some companies like the one training session with a lot of people, but others prefer to schedule multiple remote sessions with each team or division separately to keep the conversations unique and tailored to those specific processes. During these types of training sessions, teams or divisions can receive process-specific demonstrations and walkthroughs, and questions can be focused on clearing up any confusion around those processes and iron out workflows inside of the software. Apart from remote sessions, your vendor may also offer on-site training sessions, where they can come to you or you can come to them and train in one room together. Some companies prefer this approach, as it's more hands-on and you get a more intimate experience with your vendor. If your vendor visits your location for training, this also helps them get a feel of how things look and feel at your location. Apart from scheduling training with your vendor, you can also do self-guided training as well by asking for any pre-recorded videos to help serve as training guides so that users can train at their own speed. Reference materials can be amazing training materials for users, and if your vendor has any available, they will always be willing to share. Ask your vendor if they have any written out guides to help serve as walkthroughs. A lot of people prefer the step-by-step approach to learning new things, and guides are great tools to allow that. Requesting more information is never a bad thing, and oftentimes reference materials are available in different formats as well. Another format outside of written guides are pre-recorded videos. If there is anybody in your company, including yourself, who prefers to watch and learn, or watch and practice, ask your vendor if they have any pre-recorded videos. These can be great ways to learn new things. One other tip I can recommend is asking for training session recordings. Whenever I host a training session, for example, I always record it. The reason being is that some people may not be present, and with the recorded video, it's almost like they were there. This also provides a way to look back, hear questions and answers, or even just serve as future training material. If you've had or are having training sessions with your vendor, ask that the session be recorded. It never hurts. Finding time to test out what you've learned during training is a vital aspect that leads to a successful adoption. It can be hard to find time to test things out. After all, you've got a business to run. However, there are ways to train and get hands on the system to iron things out that may be worth thinking about. For example, one way to carve out training time is to schedule lunch and learns with teams to practice together. Even if this is only 30 minutes to an hour, you'd be surprised how beneficial this can be to run through things with a team. With a communal atmosphere, teams come out of these sessions with questions and ideas that can really benefit your adoption. Another way to make time for training is to request screen shares with your vendor to shadow your practice. Sometimes it's hard to take time and walk through what you've learned, and some people want an expert to be available so that questions can be asked and workflows ironed out. It's perfectly okay to ask your vendor to shadow a training session so that they can answer questions or point you in the right direction in real time. Some people prefer to test outside of working hours or alone during lunch breaks. If you have users who would like to do this, then studying reference guides and videos can be very beneficial. Sometimes your vendor may provide pre-recorded videos, as we discussed in the last slide, and practicing what is being demonstrated in tandem is a great way to get a feel for workflows. Another tip I can recommend is asking to try things out during training sessions with your vendor. For instance, if I'm hosting a one-on-one training session with someone and I'm demonstrating workflows, I will often ask them to try it out while we're on the call together. The reason I like to do this is because it's fresh in the person's mind, and oftentimes as the person is trying things, they'll ask more questions, get more involved, and gain a lot of muscle memory in participating. If you're in a training session with your vendor and the session is coming to an end, ask if you can try things out with them present. Even if there are time constraints, they will almost always be willing to schedule a follow-up call to help. It's an old cliche, but I cannot stress how important asking questions during a training session is. Questions and answers can help a lot of people, including your vendor, iron out workflows to make adoption that much easier and accurate. Questions can help clear up any confusion that may arise or make your vendor think about solving a problem another way that's more beneficial. Another thing to remember is that if someone is going to be absent at the time of training, asking them for their questions ahead of time can also be very beneficial. If you have a training session coming up and someone is not going to be available, then ask them if they have any pressing questions or anything they want to ask. Asking questions for an absent party can help provide an outlook that could prove very useful. If something your vendor has demonstrated doesn't seem right, or maybe the nomenclature is throwing you off, ask for another demonstration or even another explanation. A lot of the time your vendor will explain something from a different angle or with different verbiage to help provide a clearer picture. Another tip that I can recommend is to remember that your vendor may know the software, but you know your company and its processes. I often say to new customers, I will ask a lot of questions. It's not because I'm trying to be annoying, it's because you know your data and how things work best for you. Every time I've said this, I've always gotten a positive response. And if there's one thing I can leave with you during this webinar, it's that your vendor knows the software, but if something doesn't fit, or maybe it's not clear, always ask for more information. Trust me, as an implementer myself, they will always thank you for it. So what have we learned with this webinar? Well, we've learned that there are a variety of options for scheduling training and that you can always ask for reference materials. We've also learned that though carving out time to practice can be hard, there are a variety of ways to do so. And never be afraid to ask questions. Your vendor will always thank you for it. Thank you once again for tuning in to our third part in our 5-part series. Tune in to part 4, where we'll learn about tips on how to be proactive when deciding to migrate accounting. We'll talk about tips on choosing the migration date, communicating responsibilities, and much more to help make migrating accounting a smoother process.